In the past, there has been this idea in Commander about whether or not the format needs any ban list. The idea is, if it's a casual for fun format, why ban anything? Your playgroup should be able to self-regulate. If Spike keeps winning off of a Black Lotus into some crazy card, then maybe that much fast mana is too strong for your playgroup, and you could talk to them about that card in that deck. And back when Commander was smaller and there were a lot more insular playgroups, this might have been true. And it still is with your friends. If you want to play Black Lotus in your plant-themed deck, then who cares? You and your friends can play whatever you want. But the scope of Commander has widened. It's now the biggest format in Magic. And it is the new player onboarding format, for better or worse. So when little Timmy walks into a game store to play their first game of Magic, it's probably going to be Commander. And having a collective ban list that little Timmy can Google beforehand and everyone can follow is useful. So for years, the idea of completely abolishing the ban list has been kinda silly. But with brackets, has this changed? Cards no longer have this binary state of banned and unbanned. They could have two additional states of being: Game Changer and Bracket for Jail. That last one is not an official term, but I think it makes sense. I also want to make one thing about brackets very clear. I am very aware that they are not perfect and not laws. When I say Bracket for Jail, I'm well aware that you can build a Bracket 3 list with one MLD card as a finisher and tell your playgroup, hey, this is Bracket 3, except I have Catastrophe in it. Or you can say, hey, this is my Bracket 2 Vampire deck. I have Vampiric Tutor in it for flavor. I would be surprised if players were legitimately upset at one extra Game Changer or having one in there for flavor reasons, so on and so forth. Brackets are a tool to give a general idea of the power level of your deck. Nobody is going to arrest you if you break these. Alright, with that note out of the way, in the context of brackets, what does it mean to be a ban-worthy card? But before we get into that, I want to apologize. I'm a little sick, so my voice is a bit raspy. Apologies for that. Additionally, if you want to buy any card I mention here, banned or unbanned, check out Cool Stuff Inc. and use my code TTM for 5% off, and it supports the channel. Thanks to Cool Stuff Inc. for sponsoring the channel. So pre-Game Changers, the ban list was infamous for being a bit inconsistent. Why is this on the ban list when this isn't? Yada yada yada. And part of it is the idea of signpost bans, a card banned to show other players that similar cards might not be appropriate for most casual games. But I don't think we need signpost bans anymore. I think Game Changers can fill that role. They can work as a signpost almost, right? Fast Mana is a good example of this. Grim Monolith is kinda like a ritual spell. Mid-combo turn, it boosts you 1 mana. And Monolith is even better than most rituals, because you can just not activate it and then accelerate really hard the next turn. Plus, you have artifact untapping synergies, allowing you to reuse this ritual. So players can look at Grim Monolith on the Game Changers list, and then look at other burst mana generation cards, and assume some things. That these types of cards are pretty powerful. It looks kinda like Grim Monolith. And that is something to be wary of when you're building a Bracket 2 list. Of course, this is context dependent and such, but it is something a player could actually look at to understand the break between Brackets 2 and 3. Which then leads us to, why ban anything for casual EDH ever? If we have only Game Changers and no ban list, that does simplify things. There's only one list for players to reference. And with only 3 at max in a Bracket 3 deck, how much damage can you realistically do? Well, actually, a lot, I think. Trade Secrets serves as a perfect example. In EDH, this card lets 2 players decide to draw functionally as many cards as they want, and set each other up for the win, leaving the other 2 players in the dust. It also can be used to cheese wins from new players. If player A has a very strong tuned deck, and they target player B who has just a precon or upgraded precon, they're probably going to get a lot more advantage out of the card draw than player B would. Which means they're probably setting up for them to win, and everyone else just loses because this one card resolved and a new player didn't understand the ramifications. The social and gameplay dynamics that this card creates are pretty bad. It generally leads to heavily lopsided games where one or two players are so far ahead of the others, they almost always will win. And especially if you built around this card and understand the power of this card, it gets way worse. Additionally, Trade Secrets is card draw in blue, which means the card being banned doesn't actually prevent blue decks from drawing cards. It's something blue already has access to, so there are countless options you have to replace this as card draw in your deck. I think this is a great example of a ban-worthy card. Even as a game changer, this card being something that essentially nullifies every other card that resolved this game by winning by itself is still a problem. Okay, so if we can agree that this is a ban-worthy card, and I feel most people agree with that, then what's the point of a game changer? Well, this is somewhat up in the air still. The bracket system is still new, and there is time to shape and change it, though after the recent update, I feel like Wizards has mostly locked in what they think game changers should be. Personally, I like the idea of using game changers to help players avoid knowledge checks. I'll use humility as an example. Look, I love this card, probably more than most players, but I do think it's the perfect example of a game changer. It is ultimately an enchantment that can be removed. It does not create card advantage, and it does not prevent you from removing it, mostly. It does require a little bit of know-how. Your Reclamation Sage does not get you out from under a humility. You don't just need removal, you need the right kind of removal, making removing humility a bit more complicated than any other enchantment. So, it's kind of a knowledge check, and I think that is a great game changer card. Mass Land Destruction is also in its own little bubble. Because the card going into your list automatically makes it bracket 4, if someone is taking these brackets in good faith, they really aren't going to be including Mass Land Destruction effects in most lower bracket decks. Or at the very least, they would understand that filling your deck with Mass Land Destruction is likely not appropriate for lower bracket games. But the neat thing about this bracket 4 category is we can now unban any Mass Land Destruction without it affecting most of casual EDH. Bracket 4 Jail is kind of a neat new tool to utilize where you can play things that are too slow for CEDH but too strong for most casual tables. I think this sort of framework makes sense. Bracket 4 cards are generally locked to 4 and 5 by the nature of brackets and people using them, and then limiting your bans to cards that just create lopsided games and poor dynamics is a good idea, especially if that card's role can be replaced by other cards that lead to not the same poor gameplay dynamic. So how do we identify an actual ban-worthy card then? Well, EDH players are notoriously bad at identifying a ban-worthy card. Remember when Bootlegger's Stash got previewed and players called it an auto-include in green decks that has to be banned? This thing was pre-ordering for so much, it's really funny. I decided to ask my patrons if they had seen anyone claim something was ban-worthy, and I got a few funny responses. Some patrons mentioned Sithis, Dark Depths, Divine Intervention, Notorious Throng, and the One Ring. Well, that last one actually has a bit of merit, but you get my point. Players complain about a lot of stuff, and 4 out of 5 times, it's pretty silly. So using these ideas that I presented in this video, I want to talk about a few examples of cards that I think are ban-worthy, game changer worthy, bracket 4 jail worthy, and unban worthy, and perfect right where they are. Starting with ban worthy, I think it's Rhystic Study. If you agreed with me on Trade Secrets, Study is very similar. This card is uniquely bad for EDH. It completely crushes new players who don't know to pay the tax, and the tax is so backbreaking that at higher powered Magic, it completely obliterates those decks as well. It really is very similar to Trade Secrets, where a player can choose to give the game away to somebody else, and I have no say in that. It's very frustrating when one person plays Rhystic Study and another player decides to give them 20 cards, because you lose based on that person deciding you lose. A lot of players get frustrated at king-making plays. If somebody decided to throw the game away and use all the removal on you so a different player could win, I assume many players would be frustrated. Rhystic Study is literally doing the same thing. And normally I would be sympathetic to the play more removal argument. I'm a big fan of that. But the problem with study is the card advantage it gives and mana advantage it gives is so massive that it is almost always correct for you to expend resources to protect your own Rhystic study because it's going to pay you back in cards and mana advantage over the course of the game. And we're in blue. Protecting your Rhystic study isn't a difficult thing to do. This is why even in CDH, where players have a lot of removal and know what they're doing sometimes, it is still the best card in the format. Rhystic Study only leads to bad game dynamics. It is just so frustrating. It leads to bad politics, table dynamics, people arguing and bickering, just not conducive for a casual EDH game. And just like Trade Secrets, this is generic card draw in blue. If Rhystic Study gets banned, you have many other options for card draw that you can play. It's not going to kill your deck. All right, so what's an example of a game changer worthy card? I would like to suggest Mind Twist. This is an X spell that causes players to dump their hand randomly. The thing about this card, and many other discard heavy cards like it, they can absolutely destroy one player. Now, if you cast this in the mid game on curve for X's 4 on turn 5, it is very strong and can lead to one player having a bad game, but it doesn't cause a death sentence for them. They can still recover and come back, it's just going to be tricky. It is an extremely powerful thing to do. And when you play this in tandem with fast mana and rituals, an early Mind Twist can completely take a player out of the game very early. I don't think it's quite powerful enough to be ban worthy. It does create some awkward dynamics because one player might have to effectively do nothing for a couple turns. But I think the fact that it is really strong in context and relatively strong in a vacuum, plus leading to some awkward player dynamics, it makes it a perfect candidate as a game changer, where lower power games probably don't need this, and it serves as a signpost where a player can see this on the ban list and go, maybe super discard heavy cards like this might not be appropriate for lower bracket games. I'm also very confident that all the mass land destruction on the ban list can just come off and go to bracket 4 jail. They're too slow for CDH, so bracket 4 is really their only home, and it's kind of neat to actually have a home for these cards that are basically unplayable everywhere. Other than those, I really think Biorhythm could be unbanned and made a game changer. This card is powerful in the right context and can do some crazy game-ending things in tandem with other cards. An overloaded Psych Rift into a Biorhythm is a powerful thing you can do. But that is an 8 mana finisher with setup. And ultimately, there's lots of 8 mana things with setup that can win the game. Putting it as a game changer so it doesn't show up in bracket 2 games to avoid the knowledge check of understanding such a card could exist and suddenly take you out is perfectly fair. But there's no reason for it to be banned. It's 8 mana at this point. Lastly, I think Jeweled Lotus is perfect where it is. Banned. This card is genuinely uninteresting. It does functionally one thing. Lets you cheat your commander out early, which either lets you run away with the game if your commander is some powerful snowballing thing, particularly if it's 4 mana and you get it out on turn 1, or it punishes players for keeping a really greedy hand who then gets hit by a Swords to Plowshares and proceeds to lose the game. Every single time I saw this card, it led to one of those scenarios. All of those games felt very lopsided, luck dependent, and really didn't have much skill involved in terms of who won. It was just, did you have the removal? Yay, nay. And a removal check card that can come down as early as turn 1 is probably not very healthy for casual commander. At the very least, other rituals let you cast different spells, so it doesn't force you to make the same play every single game. And this being an artifact does give it additional power that I think makes them a little stronger than most rituals. And I mean, it's like a Lotus. It costs 0, right? It's definitely better than a lot of rituals. What makes a card ban-worthy in EDH is an interesting question, I think. Personally, even with game changers, I think we still need a ban list. There are certain cards that just really are not appropriate for casual commander. Ideally, the ban list should be as small as possible and focus on cards that really create lopsided game dynamics and warp the entire format around resolving that one card. I do think game changers means more things can come off the ban list and move on to the Game Changers list, because it does put some restriction on having that card in your list if you're following brackets to a T, but it still allows those cards to have a home, which is really great. I think more cards being playable is a good thing. Of course, though, this is just my opinion, and the reason I made this video is because I want to hear yours. I'm hopefully going to inspire some discussion in the comments, and I would love to see where people place the cards I talk about, or any other card in these 4 states of being: banned, unbanned, game changer, bracket 4, jail. Also, Boga Boy asks, what is your favorite Pop-Tart flavor? For me, it's the s'mores one. I got a big sweet tooth, and I don't really like the fruity Pop-Tarts very much, so I'm a big s'mores Pop-Tarts kind of guy. Special thanks to my patrons who asked me questions for this little Q&A section. If you want to ask me questions like this, get into the Discord, deck reviews, be in the credits like these tier 3 patrons here, click the link below and you can get in on all of that. Thanks for watching.